Afternoon. The record will reflect the presence of counsel, the defendant, and the jury. All right, I'm going to go ahead. One second. Thank you, Crystal. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and ask you the questions, and as I tell every witness, I'm just reading it exactly as it's written. And the attorneys will get to do follow-up when I'm done asking the jurors questions of the witness. All right. All right, looks like we're all set. Okay. You have mentioned several times about how clean the car had been when you examined the car. Why wasn't more attention paid by you in regard to this evidence?
I'm not sure which evidence is being referred to. So let me see if I can figure out a way to answer that. So the car was exceptionally clean, yes. So because of that, and again, because in consideration of the length of time between the incident and when I was processing the vehicle, the decision was made at that time to not look for latent prints, and also a cursory search of that vehicle, the windows, the outer part of the vehicle where latent prints may be located. We didn't see anything right off the bat, so we instead tried to focus our attention on finding any trace items of evidence in the vehicle. So that involved getting down on my hands and knees and looking up underneath where the pedals were to see if I could find any trace, fiber, or hairs or anything like that.
Okay, make sure you slow down. And this is just from me, years of doing this. And I will say, when I was a trial attorney, I know I talked fast. I used to scare the court reporters, so I know.
You need a hand signal.
So just slow down a little bit, because my good gauge is Dahlia. If Dahlia gives me the look, then I assume the jurors might have some problem keeping up too. Maybe not. So just a little bit slower. Thank you so much. All right. Can we be told the Wisconsin license plate number on vehicle again, as well as see the car detailing receipt with plate number again?
If I'm able to refer to my notes, I can give the information, the details about the plate.
Mr. Barker?
That's fine with me if she wants to refer to her notes.
And I wasn't sure. Okay, so thank you, and no objection. And I just wasn't sure if there was an exhibit that had been marked just for identification to assist the witness, which is why I was asking you first before I was getting a response from Mr. Griffin. So is that something that you have it up there with you?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Okay, all right. So both counsel are fine with you reviewing what you need to answer the question.
Okay. Okay, so again, the license plate that I have documented in my notes for this Volkswagen Jetta, Wisconsin license plate AGW 2929.
Is it common for your participation to occur 2 months, I'll make it plural, 2 months, after the actual date of when the body had been found or the crime had been committed?
I wouldn't say that's typical. Usually I'm called pretty close to the time of the incident, but in this particular case, if they don't have a suspect, if a suspect isn't developed until sometime later in the future, once they have a suspect and a vehicle to process, then it makes complete sense that I would have been called when I was called.
Did you look into the hair DNA after your interview with defense counsel as you did with the pliers? If not, why?
I did not look into the items of evidence that were submitted to the laboratory and had requests for scientific analysis. So for me, when I process a scene and I go to the scene and I collect the items of evidence and I turn those over to the detectives for submission, that pretty much concludes my involvement in the case, unless for some reason one of the detectives calls me for guidance or for clarification maybe on a report, but I don't really have any reason to go back and to kind of follow along with the case to see what's submitted and what items of evidence were analyzed. In this particular case with the Transcripts, I was specifically asked about that analysis in an interview that I had with the defense, and so that did prompt me to go back and specifically look at that analysis and the results of that analysis.
In hindsight, was it a mistake not to look for latent prints?
I don't think so. I stand by the way that we process the vehicle, and after some reflection actually during the break, it did occur to me that one of the very last things that we did in processing the scene after we looked underneath the vehicle for the vegetation, we did have the thought that perhaps if somebody had been transported in the trunk, that might be a good area where latent prints may be present. So we did go back and remove some molding from around the trunk that was collected and could have been submitted for future latent print testing. But again, with the cleanliness of the vehicle, I just really felt that our chances of getting any latent prints would be pretty minimal.
3 months had gone by from Sasha's disappearance to your examination. What was the probability of finding anything significant?
Well, again, I think it depends on any items of evidence that were related to the scene. If those items of evidence are in the vehicle for 3 months, 6 months, 2 years later, by the time we process that vehicle, if they're still in there, then we're going to find them. And maybe you're talking about things like that, like the latent print DNA, latent print evidence or the DNA evidence specifically. As I mentioned before, the DNA is pretty hardy. So I gave the example earlier of touching this countertop. Unless somebody comes along and scrubs off this countertop, my DNA is going to stay here for a very, very, very long time. So DNA will stick around for a long time. And as counsel mentioned, latent prints are a little bit more fragile. So while I'm leaving my latent prints here on this countertop, the chances of those maybe getting destroyed are a little bit greater than my DNA not being there.
Did the car have child safety locks?
Oh, goodness. I don't know that I looked for child safety locks. They may be present in the some of the photographs if they were present.
Did you test for cinders underneath the car?
No.
Right. Any other questions for this witness from the jury before I turn the witness over to the attorneys for follow-up? Okay, apparently we may have some more questions. Thank you. Counsel, will you approach, please? Oh, sorry. Was there any evidence that suggests that bleach was used in cleaning the vehicle?
There was no evidence that bleach was used, but there was no evidence that bleach wasn't used. So diluted bleach may have been used to wipe off surfaces. There was no indication of bleach staining. So, you know, on cloth material, if you spill bleach, that would be obvious. There was no indication of that.
So the next question is, can we see the car detail receipt? So I don't know that it's really a question for this witness, but counsel, do you want to put that up on the screen?
Car detail receipt, I can. That's 158.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions from the jury for this witness? All right, I don't see, do we? I'm sorry. Remember what I said? I'd give you plenty of time, no rush, no rush. So all you have to do is exactly what you did. Just kind of raise your hand, get my attention or Mike's attention and the attorneys, and we'll give you some more time. So it looks like we might have another question. Thank you. Counsel, your approach, please. What was the distance between Luke Air Force Base and the detail shop?
I don't have that information.
Any other questions for this witness from the jury before I turn the witness back over to counsel for follow-up? All right, no other questions. All right, Mr. Barker.
Thank you. Let's just go in reverse order. The distance, you're from Phoenix, or at least you live there, right?
Correct.
Luke Air Force Base is in what city?
It's in Glendale?
All right. Let's just show this may be a question for another witness later in the trial, but can you see can we get the lights? Thanks. There is an address on that receipt. You can see that there, Thunderbird Avenue, 7934 West. Do you know where that is roughly?
I do. I think that would be approximately 79th Avenue and Thunderbird.
Right. Okay. Do you know, is that in Phoenix, in Glendale? Do you know?
That I cannot tell you.
All right. Thank you. And while we're on the subject of receipts, let me go to that bleach receipt. You were asked a question about bleach. What was sorry, let me zoom out a little bit. What was the date of the purchase of the liquid bleach? Do you see that?
That was on February 23rd of 2020.
All right. You were asked a question about 3 months later, what's the probability of finding something significant? I mean, you mentioned that DNA can last a long time. That's, of course, if it was ever left there, right?
Correct.
You gave an example of putting your hand on the desk. It's possible, though, that DNA won't be left there, even if you touch an item.
Correct.
And the same thing could be said for latent prints.
Correct.
And when we're talking about latent prints, we're talking about the ridges on the fingers and the thumb, right?
Yes, and it could also be palm prints as well.
And palm prints, thank you. So let me give you a scenario. If someone's hands were duct taped so their palms were together in this fashion, would that make it significantly harder to leave fingerprints or latent prints on an item?
Yes. Yes.
I didn't hear that. Thank you. You were asked about, is it common for you to process a scene 2 months after the crime has occurred? I think you answered this about, it depends on when that suspect is identified, right?
And yeah, I guess I could also say it depends on when a crime is known. I had a case once with a buried body, so it wasn't until 7 years later that I was able to go and process the scene of a buried body. So I think it's just when the crime is known and/or when a suspect is known and items of evidence or scenes need to be processed.
And just because some time has passed doesn't mean you don't try, right?
I'm sorry?
Just because it's been some time that has passed doesn't mean you don't try.
Oh, correct.
You're going to look and see what you can find. Maybe there's
Absolutely.
nothing, right?
Absolutely.
You were asked a question about the car wash receipt in the license plate. There was some difference there. One says AZ. You're not familiar with that car wash and why that would have an AZ after the license plate, are you?
No.
You're asked a question about why wasn't more attention, and I'm paraphrasing, why wasn't more attention paid by you regarding this evidence? If we're reading that to mean the car evidence, did you spend significant time looking through that car?
This was an exceptionally clean car, and I spent approximately 12 hours processing that car to give some perspective and some idea about how much time I spent processing that vehicle and looking for any possible items of evidence.
Is that an average amount of time you would spend in processing a car, more or less?
I think it depends on what I'm looking for, but I've had vehicles that were just completely packed, with different items and spent half the amount of time looking through those cars. Again, just depends on what I'm looking for. And in this case, because it was so clean, I felt the need to really pay attention to any of those smaller, finer details. And again, going back to that trace evidence and taking time to diligently and thoroughly really process that car and look for any items that may still be present.
All right, thank you. That's all I have.
Brief follow-up. You mentioned that in one of your answers you talked about you even crawling up underneath and looking for fibers. Do you recall that?
Underneath the pedals, not underneath the vehicle.
No, I'm sorry.
Yes, correct.
The pedals, yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Looking for fibers, correct?
Yes, hair, fibers, any pieces of evidence.
And in your briefing, were you given an indication of anything in the way of clothing that might be unique, that might have fiber, that might be important?
Yes, I was given information about what the victim was wearing. I was given information about the hair, what her hair looked like. Yeah, so I had a basic idea of what I was looking for.
So in evidence, we have seen photographs of the clothing that was worn by the deceased, one piece of which was a fleece, white, jet white in color, pullover with a hoodie. Did you know that?
I don't specifically recall it at this time, but I'm sure that I was given that information during the briefing.
Did you locate any fiber that was consistent with that, white in color?
As I mentioned, again, with the cleanliness of the car and trying to find a small fiber such as that is pretty difficult. So instead what I did that's why I used those tape lifts to go in, and that would pick up any type of material such as that. That might be difficult for me to see with the naked eye. So that's why I used that tape lifting. After I searched to find any obvious items of evidence, I went back and used the tape lift just to go back and collect anything that might be there that I wasn't able to see.
To your naked eye, did you see anything consistent with a white fiber from a fleece type coat?
No.
One of the jurors brought up the reference to cinders. Was your briefing, did it include the fact that at the scene where the body was located was a volcanic area near Sunset Crater, the surface of which is black cinders?
Yes.
And so you were on the alert to be looking for black cinders as well?
Yes.
And did you discover any black cinders in the interior of the car?
I did not.
You were asked about whether you tested for cinders. Did you see any black cinders on any apparatus on the undercarriage of the car?
I did not.
You're asked a question about bleach, and I just want to clarify. In your briefing, you told us that you knew that Mr. Gooch was a member of the Air Force. Did you get told about any of the protocols involved at the Air Force Base regarding COVID or the pandemic?
No, I think this was pretty early on in that, so I didn't get any information about that.
So no discussion about any measures being required by the military in terms of sanitizing their areas with bleach?
No.
Nothing further?
All right, may this witness be excused, Mr. Barker? Oh.
With respect, I left one out. Could I do one more question?
You may.
Thank you. You were asked one final question about the tape and the surface of the tape and whether there could be, given the configuration, the ability to leave prints. One additional question. You know from past experience that tape is a particularly receptive, including the adhesive part of it, receptive area for fingerprints, do you not?
I know that, but I didn't understand the first part of your question being asked about tape.
Well, let me just ask you this. So you were aware of the fact that there was a unique style of duct tape that was involved in with the victim's body, correct?
Yes,
We're certainly looking for that.
yes,
You looked through all the tools and all the stuff. Did you find any duct tape like that?
no.
Did you find any type of electrical tape or other tape in the tool area?
I may have, again, I'd have to go back through the pictures. There was a lot of stuff in the trunk, but nothing consistent with the particular type of tape that they were looking for.
And again, as to the surface of that type of tape, including the exterior surface and the adhesive surface, is it your experience that that is a receptive area for fingerprints?
Yes,
And oftentimes, fingerprints are left on the interior of the tape when it's being torn, applied, those kinds of things. Is that fair?
yes, that's possible.
I think you have no further.
Thank you. Mr. Barker, may this witness be excused?
Yes, thank you.
All right, you may be excused and step down. Mr. Barker, you may call your next witness.
State call Samuel.
All the way up here, please. The bailiff's busy. Stop right there. Look at the.
Do you affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? This you do under the penalty of perjury?
Okay, there you go. Thank you. You may proceed when ready, Mr. Barker.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Can you state your name for the record, please?
Samuel Gooch?
All right, are you Mark Gooch's brother?
Yes.
You see him in the court today.
Yes, I do.
Can you point out where he's seated and identify him?
He's sitting right there.
What's he wearing?
A gray suit and a blue tie.
All right, and he's seated to my left, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
All right, may the record reflect the witness identified the defendant.
The record so reflects.
Thank you. Let's see, are you his older brother then?
Yes, I'm his older brother.
All right, next in line up.
Correct.
Is he the youngest?
He is.
Okay, and how many kids in the family?
There are 7 children.
And where did you grow up, sir?
Most of my growing up years were spent in Gleason, Wisconsin.
And did you grow up as a Mennonite?
Yes, I did.
Are you a Mennonite still?
I am not.
Did you ever join the Mennonite church?
No, I did not.
What about Mark Gooch? Did he ever join the Mennonite church?
He did not.
But he also grew up in that same community, is that right?
That is correct.
All right. Give us a time frame for when you grew up there in Gleason.
Approximately 2001 to 2018.
All right. And where do you live now?
Antigo, Wisconsin.
How far away is that?
Approximately 25 miles.
Okay. And so 2018 is when you left Gleason, is that what you're saying?
That is when I moved out, correct.
Okay. And what about Mark Gooch? When did he move out?
can't say exactly, but approximately within that same year.
All right. And you understood then that he moved out to join the military, is that right?
That would be correct.
Okay. I mean, correct me if I'm misstating something. It was the military that you left for, right?
Not directly, but shortly thereafter.
Okay. Where did you go first?
He lived in my parents' house after they moved for a time and also lived with me for a short time.
All right. And then you remember when he went to the Air Force?
I believe it was in early 2019.
Okay. Now, we've heard a little bit about Mennonites and the religion. Military service is not something Mennonites approve of, is that right?
That is correct.
And what do you do professionally?
I work in the IT field.
And what specifically do you do?
I do installation and repair of phone and internet systems.
All right, so is that phone, cell phone, or is that a different type of phone system?
All types, landline and business type phone systems.
All right. Do you have familiarity with cell phones as well?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Let me ask you a little bit about the church you grew up in. Mennonites, is there a spectrum, if you will, of beliefs within the Mennonites? Traditional, non-traditional, everything in between?
Yes, there's a wide variety of beliefs within the Mennonite churches.
Okay. And what church was the one that you grew up in like?
It would have been more conservative.
You're familiar with the Lamp and Light Mennonite church?
I am.
You are now, probably not at the time you were living in Gleason, though, right?
No, I was not.
Okay. Would that, from what you know about the Lamp and Light community, is that similar to the community you grew up in?
I would expect it would be somewhat similar.
In other words, was it a conservative Mennonite church as opposed to something less conservative?
From what I know of it, it is.
Okay. And what is the distinction? How do we distinguish a conservative versus other types of Mennonites?
I'm no expert on Mennonites, but the easiest way is based on dress. You get further into it, beliefs and other such things.
All right. So technology, for instance, is technology something that if you're a conservative Mennonite, you're probably not having a smartphone, for instance. Is that fair?
That's fair.
And popular entertainment, that's not something that you would participate in, right?
Correct.
All right. And then the manner of dress, we've heard from Mennonites, as you might imagine in this case, about the head covering for women. The men are wearing plain shirts. Is that what you remember?
Yes, it is.
Did Mark Gooch hold any grudges against the Mennonites?
I can't necessarily speak to what Mark's feelings might have been.
Well, that's what you told police, right? That he had a grudge against the community?
At the time, that's what I said.
What do you mean at the time?
When that interview was done.
Do you remember when that was?
Early 2020, I think April, end of April, I want to say.
Okay, end of April of last year, right?
Correct.
Okay. And you told the police that he had a grudge against the Mennonite church, right?
That is what I said.
All right. Are you changing your opinion now?
At the time, that was opinion and speculation. I can't 100% speak to how Mark may feel or think.
Sure. We're not asking you to get inside of his mind, but why would you say that he had a grudge at that time?
I don't recall my mindset at the time. That is what I said based on transcripts, but I can't necessarily know what I was thinking on why I would have said that at the time.
Would you tell him to let it go, let that grudge go?
If that were the case, yes.
Well, that's what you told the police you told him, right?
I believe so.
Did you tell him you can't blame them, the Mennonites, for how you grew up?
That sounds correct.
And why would you say that if he hadn't told you he had a grudge?
The way we grew up was, as you know, different from many people. It wasn't always easy for all of us. Each of us had different experiences, and we took it different ways.
And is it your understanding that Mark Gooch did not have a positive experience in the Mennonite church?
You could say that.
I'm asking you what you could say.
That would be a question for Mark Gooch.
Did you have a positive experience with the Mennonites?
I hold no ill will towards the Mennonite group. That is part of my upbringing, and I accept it for what it is. But as I grew up, I made my own decisions in life and chose to move on from that.
Right. So you're telling us under oath now that Mark Gooch never told you he had a grudge. This is something you just told the police.
Those are my own words. Mark would have never, to my recollection, Mark's never said those words to me.
Has he said something similar to you about having a negative opinion about Mennonites?
In our discussions, negative conversations about Mennonites did occur.
Tell me about it.
I can't recall a specific conversation.
Okay. Well, the gist of the conversation was what?
We would talk about our upbringing and how we didn't necessarily want to follow that, or different things we disagreed with.
Aside from just the beliefs, though, wasn't there a feeling that this Mennonite community pushed you out or didn't accept your family?
You could say that, yes.
I don't want to say, I want you to say what the truth is, sir. What was your memory of that experience?
My memory of the experience would have been, it was easy to feel that that we were less accepted into that culture, since we were not necessarily born into it, not a multi-generational family that had been in the Mennonites for decades.
All right, so there wasn't a feeling of acceptance. Is that fair?
I think that's fair.
All right. Did that generate some negative feelings?
It could have.
It's a yes or no question for you.
For myself, it did at the time.
Okay. We've talked about the birth order. You're just above Mark Gooch in that birth order. How many years senior did we say?
About 3.5 years.
3.5 years. Would you say you're the closest one to him, not just in age, but also just keeping in touch with him?
That's likely correct. I can't speak for Mark's relationship with my other siblings or family.
All right. But you talk a lot, a fair amount. Is that fair?
That's fair. We did.
Mostly through text messages, though.
Yes.
What was your cell phone number?
My full
Back in 2020, what was your cell phone number?
You want to give to
Yes.
give my cell phone number in court here?
That's right.
My number in 2020 was 715-921-2044.
And what was Mark Gooch's cell phone number?
715-610-3215.
Okay. Did you know that Mark Gooch was surveilling Mennonites?
I'm assuming you're basing that on the text message in exchange between us.
It's a yes or no question. Did you know?
I'll sustain the objection if you want to ask another foundation
Sure.
question, Mr. Barker.
Absolutely. Let's say early of last year.
Based on that text message, which I took at face value, yes.
Okay. And a text message you're talking about, this was a message Mark Gooch sent to you about surveillance of Mennonites?
Correct.
Outside of that text message, did he talk to you about surveilling Mennonites?
No, he had expressed interest in looking for a church close by or attending a service, but never anything regarding surveillance.
When did he say he wanted to attend a church?
I can't put an exact time frame on it, but
Was that in a text or a phone call?
that was over communication. That was when we talked over the computer.
All right, playing video games and you're talking to each other? Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
To the best of my knowledge.
When was this text that he sent about doing surveillance on Mennonites?
Based on the records I have seen, I believe it was mid-January.
Would it help refresh your memory if I showed you the cell phone record?
Yes.
May I approach? Any calls in December?
No listed calls in December.
No listed calls. What about January?
Several calls in January.
All right, let's take it from the 1st of January. What do you see?
Nothing up until January 18th.
So no calls in December, no calls until January 18. How many calls on January 18?
6 calls.
6?
6 calls.
Okay. When was the first phone call?
10:58 a.m.
How long did that last?
25 minutes and 7 seconds.
What was that conversation about?
I don't recall anything of substance from those conversations.
All right. What was the next call on that date?
12:06 p.m. for 8 minutes and 32 seconds. 8 minutes and 42 seconds.
And let's just specify who's calling whom.
It would appear Mark Gooch is calling myself.
Okay. On both of those calls that we just talked about?
Those 2 calls, correct.
All right. What about the next phone call that day?
At 12:17 p.m. for 3 minutes and 42 seconds.
What about the next call?
1:19 p.m. Missed call, 0 minutes.
Who was calling whom?
I was calling Mark Gooch.
All right. You were calling him. It was a missed call. What about the next call?
1:25 p.m.
How long?
30 minutes and 33 seconds.
Who was calling whom?
I was calling Mark Gooch.
You sure?
No, that's right. I'm sorry. It looks like Mark Gooch is calling myself.
All right. Thank you. And I think there's one more call, right? This would be the 6th call of that day?
Correct. At 4:55 p.m. for 25 minutes and 44 seconds, Mark Gooch was calling myself.
So if we were to add up all that time, we're talking about over 90 minutes of phone conversation that day. Is that right?
That seems correct.
Okay. You don't remember anything from those conversations?
If something would have stood out, I believe I would recall that.
Do you know where he was when he made those calls?
I do not recall where he was.
Did he say anything about taking a trip that day?
Not that I can remember.
All right. So the last contact you had with him on that date was at 4:55 p.m. That was a phone call. Any text messages with him that day? We'll have to go to the text record for that.
Want me to look at the MMS or the SMS or both?
You can look at both. So Exhibit 75 would be the MMS record. Just asking about that day, January 18.
Yes, there's some MMS messages.
Is that between you and him or someone else and Mark Gooch?
It looks to be between me and him.
All right. What were the texts about?
far as the MMS messages, I stated I was on my couch playing games, that I needed to go out and do snow removal soon. He then sent me a link to a Facebook post, and there appears to be a photo which I can't identify.
All right. And that was on what date and what
January 18th, 2020.
time? What time, I'm sorry?
First one was at 10:48 a.m. The next one was at 11:17 a.m. And the final one was at 4:47 p.m.
All right. And was that the extent of the text conversation, at least on the MMS?
For the 18th, yes.
All right. Why don't you look at the SMS, just make sure we're not missing something. It's Exhibit 76.
There appears to be several SMS messages on January 18th, 2020.
Between you and him?
Correct.
All right. And what's the content of that?
First message is WYD question mark.
From who?
From Mark Gooch to myself.
And what's the response?
I believe that was in the MMS where I stated I was playing games on my couch and needed to go out to do snow removal soon.
All right.
Sorry, need to do what? I'm having trouble hearing that response.
Need to do snow removal soon.
Sorry.
Thank you. And then was there another text later?
Yes, on the 18th.
Is that between you and him?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, we'll just stick with the text between you and him. So that was it as far as text messages on that day, right?
It would appear so.
All right. Now, sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to go to the other Exhibit 75 again. What was the next communication you had with Mark Gooch after the 18th?
Which
Yeah.
exhibit is Exhibit 75?
75, yep.
Which
The
one?
MMS, I'm sorry.
MMS.
You talked about a text message sent, or an MMS message sent him around 4:47 p.m. on the 18th. What was the very next communication?
On the 19th at 11:44 a.m.
All right, so this would have been the next morning, a.m., and what did you ask?
Where are you at by now? Question mark.
Where are you at by now? What were you talking about?
I can't remember the circumstances surrounding that text. I can only take it at face value.
Did you have a phone conversation with him in reference to where he might be?
Not that I can recall.
Okay. Is it fair to say you don't have any memory about any conversation you had with Mark Gooch on the 18th of January?
I would say that's fair.
Would it also be fair to say that you had the most conversation you'd ever had during that year-and-a-half period with him on the 18th of January?
Only in the context of phone calls, not in the context of other forms of communication.
Other forms being,
Talking over the computer, we would talk quite extensively for hours a week.
all right. So fair to say he wasn't on the computer during that day, right?
Based on the phone calls, correct.
Now, if you go to Exhibit 75, and only if you need to reference it, Do you remember having a conversation about him getting his car cleaned?
I do.
Okay. Do you remember him talking about getting it detailed?
Yes.
So that does stand out in your mind, that conversation about it getting a car wash.
I have read these text message transcripts before.
When did you read them?
I can't state exactly when.
Okay, it wasn't when the police talked to you the first time, right?
No.
So sometime afterwards, you read through those?
Correct.
Do you know how to remotely wipe a phone?
Yes.
All right. Is that something you learned at your work or just something you learned on the side?
Technology interests me, and I dabble in a lot of parts of it. I would say that's something I would learn on my own time.
All right. After his arrest, did Mark ask you to remotely wipe his phone?
Yes, I believe so.
And not just his phone, but the SD cards as well?
Based on the transcripts, that is correct.
You remember when that conversation occurred?
I believe it was shortly or within a few days of his arrest.
May I have a moment, Judge? So on that last topic of technology, and you're pretty savvy with technology, right?
That is correct.
Part of your profession. Did you also attempt to clean out Mark Gooch's Google account?
No, I did not.
There was no conversation about deleting anything from Google?
Not that I recall. Our conversation was about accessing his accounts. I was going to do so with the intention of canceling any auto payments and bills and so forth he may have had.
All right. And that was in the same conversation where he asked you to remotely wipe his phone?
I believe so.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Griffin?
Good afternoon, Mr. Gooch. Bruce Griffin, I represent your brother Mark.
Good afternoon.
Couple things that I want to review with you. Of all the texts, that form of communication that you had with your brother over the last couple of years, two of them have had something to do with Mennonites. One with Sam and you, one with you, Mark, and Jake. Got that one?
Yes.
And one with you and Mark about surveilling, you recall that one as well?
Yes.
Are there any, to your knowledge, are there any other text messages between you and your brother about Mennonites?
Not that I can recall.
So over that period of time, would you say that was a hot topic or just something that would casually come up?
It was not something we would talk about frequently at all.
Now, if I told you that January 12th was a Sunday when that text occurred, the January 12th, 2020 text, do you know whether or not Mennonites generally hold church on Sundays?
They do.
And is it generally in the morning, afternoon, evening, or can you say?
Based on my experience, they generally hold morning services on Sundays.
So would it have been consistent with your brothers searching for a church to attend that he might be looking at a church on the morning or on the day of the Sunday?
It would.
If I substituted out the word surveil and put in looking, checking out, scoping out, would that give a different context to you?
Possibly.
Let me put it a different way. The word surveil is being used, it's suggested, or sounds like, being used in a sinister, negative way. Do you perceive it that way?
I did not perceive that text message in that way.
Your brother's a military guy. Could that be simply him using a military word?
Yes, it was not unusual for words like that
But again, your understanding is that your brother had reached out to you and mentioned that he would be interested in trying to link up with some church.
Yes.
Now, you were asked about some negativity, or at least, some of the concerns about your relationship with the Mennonite church. Were there a lot of young people involved in the church back in Gleason?
There were a few, yes.
Was there a lot of interaction with young people, or was the population getting older?
I would say it was a somewhat equal mix.
You know whether your brother was looking for a congregation that had people that were similar in age or older?
I would expect he would be looking for people similar in age.
Objection, speculation.
Sustained.
How did you take his expressions to you on January 12th?
That he was seeking a Mennonite church to attend.
You talked about the only other exchange about Mennonites being the maybe having taken it too far with your brother Jake and with your brother Mark. Is that right?
That's right.
March call, the March communication.
That is correct.
Did your brother ever express to you, you were asked about negativity or whatever, did he ever express hatred, animosity, homicidal ideation about Mennonites?
No, he did not.
Did you ever, in any of your communication, whether it be text or talking over the computer, did any of that conversation ever arise?
Based on your previous question?
Yes.
No, it did not.
In your you were asked about your early years in Gleason. Did that include attending Mennonite school?
It did.
Did that include attending Mennonite church on a regular basis?
Yes.
Were you ever required to join the church?
No, that was a choice left up to the individuals.
Did some of your family join the church?
Yes.
Some of your siblings?
Correct.
But you did not, Mark did not.
That is correct.
Did you have any perception that on January 18th, the conversations you were having with Mark, that he was traveling?
I believe we may have lost cell service, or the call dropped. That would have been maybe my only perception of he was traveling.
Did he ever express to you that he was going to New Mexico to look at a church?
Not that I recall.
There was some math done about how much time you had talked to Mark on January 18th. And you mentioned that that may have been the most time that you talked by phone, but you mentioned some other form of communication over the computer. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And would you characterize for the jury what was the most frequent means of communication you used with your brother Mark?
Over the computer, possibly by text.
So let's kind of set those out. So you can communicate by phone, correct?
Correct.
You can communicate by text, whether it be message, SMS, or whatever the mode might be, correct?
Correct.
And you mentioned you can communicate by computer. Is that also correct?
That is correct.
Now, for just everyone's benefit, when you say communicate by computer, Are you talking about talking or sending messages? How does that work?
Voice conversation.
Right, so set that up for me. What would be a situation where you would be on the phone with your brother for lengthy periods of time?
We would play online games together, and while doing so, we would have our headsets and chat with each other over the voice, with our mics.
Would that be for just a few seconds, a few minutes? What would be the duration of that kind of conversation?
Usually several hours at a time.
And that would occur on a random basis once in a while? How frequently?
It was irregular, but typically at least once a week.
I just have a minute. Thank you. Nothing further. Thank you.
Mr. Barker?
Just a few follow-up questions. On that last topic, the computer talking, you're not on a cell phone, you're on a headset, and you're communicating through a computer, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. While you're playing the video games.
Correct.
Now, counsel asked you about your memory of that trip on January 18th. I'm calling it a trip, sorry. The conversation you had on January 18th. And you do remember the call dropping at some point,
Yes.
but you don't remember anything about the content?
Not that I can recall.
Counsel asked you about surveillance, if that's a word that he may have used because he's a military guy. To be fair, nothing against mechanics, but he was in combat. He was a mechanic in the Air Force, right?
Correct.
And would it surprise you to learn that he never used the word surveillance anywhere else in that text record?
No, it would not.
Counsel asked you about any expression of animosity against the Mennonite church. And I think you said he never expressed animosity, right?
Not animosity.
If it wasn't animosity, what was it?
We would occasionally have conversations. The Mennonites would occasionally reference, but it was not a large part of our conversations.
All right, but if it wasn't animosity, what was the feeling around the Mennonites?
I'm not quite sure what I can say what Mark's feelings would have been. All I know is Mennonites have been discussed in our conversations.
All right, I guess what I'm getting at is, if it wasn't something negative, then why would you tell the police he had a grudge against the Mennonite community?
That is what I said at the time.
Why?
When the police interviewed me at that time, they were, it was unexpected. They were peppering me with questions, trying to get some sort of answer, and that is what I answered at the time because that's the only thing I could possibly think of.
You just made it up.
That is what I said.
Judge, can we approach?
Yeah. Can we go sidebar? Mr. Barker, you may proceed when ready.
Thank you. Last two questions, sir. This is a yes or no question. Do you have a felony conviction?
Yes, I do.
And what is the date of that conviction?
October 3rd, 2020. I may add that conviction.
Hold on.
There's no question pending to you right now. I mean, can I just say that? There's no question pending to you right now. Go ahead, Mr. Barker.
Thank you. I guess I was going to object non-responsive, but the answer to the question was what date? October?
October 3rd, 2020.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Mr. Griffin, any follow-up? All right, may this witness be excused.
Yes, thank you.
You can step down and you're excused. Oh, wait a minute. How did I do that? How did I do that? I know why I did it, so now I'll explain my thinking, because we were going to take a break. We've already talked, I was talking to counsel on the sidebar. Good thing I keep an eye on you. I saw a lot of hands raised there. So, sorry, folks. I've not done that before, I don't think. But it's because I know we were going to take a break. So, I'm sorry. So we're going to take a break here in a moment. If you have any questions, okay, we've gotten those. Okay. So the break might be a little bit longer because I've got to give, thank you. I have to, the attorneys need a break, as does court staff, including Dahlia. But so I'm just going to let you know the break might be a little bit longer than 15 minutes, so we have a chance to review your questions and be ready for that. So remember the admonition. Please do not talk to anyone about the case. Do not let anyone talk to you about the case. Please keep an open mind. Thank you. And please do not form any opinions about the case. So again, the break, I'm going to tell you right now, it's going to be a little bit longer than 15 minutes. But I think it could well be about 20 minutes or so. So just to let you know that, but we'll check on you and make sure everybody's ready to go to get you back into the courtroom for continued testimony. Enjoy the recess. Please be seated. So the record will reflect the jury's been excused for the afternoon recess. On that last break, it was brought to my attention by court staff that it was brought to my attention by court staff that at one point before we took the break, the camera panned and some of the jurors were depicted. Wait.
You wanted him to stay. I didn't know if you wanted to witness. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. It's all right.
I think you can step down now, Judge.
You can step down, but don't. But you're still on the stand. Okay, so you can step down. Sorry. And that is such a huge problem. Well, let me finish, okay? And I'll listen to you, but I got to tell you, I'm just so frustrated. This is 2 times today that I've had to say something about the footage, and it's in the court's order. I asked, I'm looking right at the cameraman, I asked if you, because I know you weren't here last week, they substituted camera folks, I guess, not sure what your exact title is, but I asked you this morning after the incident I was concerned about this morning, do you have a copy of the court's order? And you said you did. And I think this, I mean, I can't speak for any other state but Arizona, but I'm assuming that other states are similar to Arizona where jurors can never, ever, 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 ever be shown on camera footage and still photographs. I told that to the jurors. I told them they would not be depicted. So it puts me in a horrible light with them. So what's going on? Why is this, why did that happen? All right, so it cannot happen again. If it happens again, I got to tell you, if it happens again, I may well have to say that you can no longer film the trial. I may have to do that. I don't want to be put into that position. I believe in open courts, and it's not just that I believe in it. It's fundamental in our democracy. So I'm trying to be respectful and reasonable, but I need that in return. And it's very important that both sides get a fair trial. And it's also important that the jurors not have to worry that they're going to be depicted in the footage. So what I'm going to, I have a couple thoughts. I'm not a camera person, but when we go sidebar, can you not have the camera at all in this direction, because here's the other issue. I've told the jurors, and I told them this, I know you weren't here last week, but I tell all the jurors this, is that when we take sidebars, it's a really good time for you to stand up and move around and stretch. So they're going to continue to do it, I think, because I encourage them to do it so that we can keep going. It's long days for them. So, okay, I just need them not depicted, especially because I told them that, and I want, you know, when I give someone my word, I want them to know that I keep my word. And of course, I mean, they would know this is out of my control, but they may well be upset if they hear about it, you know, with the court. And it just can't happen again. Okay, it just cannot happen again. And to have 2 incidents today has got me on heightened, I'm telling you, I'm on heightened scrutiny here. And I'm not watching the live stream, but there are other people connected with the case that are. And this was brought to my attention and counsel's attention at the last sidebar by the clerk of the court, who brought it to my attention. So, all right, counsel, I don't know if you have anything you want to add in that regard. Okay, all right. Want to get the break started with Dahlia and with Brooke. Can I talk to, can you come up and we can talk a little bit about the number of questions? Oh, here's another question, okay. So we stand in recess. It'll be 15 minutes from right now, because I've got to give Dahlia and Brooke at least 15 minutes. So 3:03. And then, counsel, just come up for a moment, please. So.